What if the final thing you remembered as a human was a single color? Not the sound of a loved one's voice, not the warmth of a memory, not even the face of someone you had once sworn never to forget, but a color, soft and fleeting, a shade of blue that lingered for one last moment before the machines took everything else away. I remember it clearly, more clearly than the cut of the scalpel or the burning stink of my flesh as the tech priests prepared their instruments. I do not remember the pain of the incision, not the moment the cortical inhibitor slid into the soft matter of my brain. All of that was washed away. What remained was a sight, so simple and so ordinary that it cut through the horror like a hymn in a slaughterhouse. There was a servitor in the medici bay where they held me. She was an old woman, or what had once been one, her body hollowed and rebuilt until she was more piston than bone, more conduit than flesh. Cables pierced her eye sockets, steel braced her ribs, iron hissed where lungs should have breathed. She moved back and forth across the same patch of stone, scrubbing without pause, without variation. 3 square meters of tile rubbed over and over until it gleamed. Endless repetition, endless obedience, endless silence. Her skin looked like parchment stretched too tight, paper yellow and dry. Her motions were mechanical, drained of meaning. But her robe, Emperor preserve me, her robe was blue. Not the proud midnight blue of an Astartes armor, not the lightning flare of a plasma coil, but something softer. The faded blue of a summer sky on a nameless world. The kind of sky a child looks up to before they know what it means to bow, to toil, to suffer. I stared at that cloth while the adepts tightened their harness around me. It was not bright. It was worn, threadbare in places, the hem frayed by years of labor. Yet to my eyes, it seemed brighter than any lumen lamp. That blue stirred something long buried. It reminded me of my sister, of the simple dress she wore each throne day, the one that made her look as though she carried a piece of heaven on her shoulders. I remembered walking beside her, hearing the bells ring, watching the way light touched the fabric as she laughed. For a breath, I was not a prisoner. For a breath, I was not a man condemned. I was a boy again, and the galaxy was wide, full of promise. That memory rose like incense in the foul air of the chamber, fragile, trembling, impossible. It was beauty for beauty's sake. Untouched by use, untouched by order, untouched by the grinding weight of duty. And that was the moment I knew it was the last of me. Because the Adeptus Mechanicus does not permit such thoughts. There is no place for beauty in the cold hymn of the machine. They strip it out. They carve it away. They wash the mind until nothing remains but efficiency and compliance. That robe's color was the final proof that I was still human. The final flicker of self before obedience replaced memory, before utility smothered wonder. And when the chemicals filled my veins and the dampeners began their steady work, that color dissolved into darkness. Blue faded to black, and the process of unmaking my humanity began. How do you destroy a soul before the first scalpel ever cuts? You place it in silence. You take away the light. You strip the body of sound, of touch, of any anchor that might remind it what it means to be alive. That is how it begins. Not with a blade, but with a chamber. They strapped me into a harness bolted to a wall of steel. The air was cold, sharp as metal itself. No voice reached me. No hand touched me. No warmth remained. Only the hiss of machinery, the stench of disinfectant, the bite of iron against skin. The chamber had no time, no clocks, no cycles, no rhythm. Minutes bled into hours, hours into days, days into something too long to name. I could not tell when I slept, when I woke, when one breath ended and the next began. Darkness pressed against my eyes until shapes formed out of nothing. My heartbeat became a drum, each thud echoing like a hammer in an empty cathedral. My breath roared in my ears, louder than engines. The rush of blood through my skull was a storm wind that never stopped. Isolation was the first incision. It cut deeper than steel. The silence hollowed me. The emptiness grew until my own thoughts became unbearable, louder than screaming. I begged for sound, for light, for anything to prove I still existed beyond the harness. That was when the whispers began. At first, too faint to notice. A vibration beneath perception, a trembling at the edge of hearing. Then words. Words in high Gothic. Sacred syllables wrapped in static, prayers to the Omnissiah, repeated again and again at a pitch too low for waking thought. They slipped past reason and burrowed into the marrow of sleep. At night, I dreamed of gears. I dreamed of the click of teeth interlocking, of engines humming in eternal harmony. Efficiency, compliance, flesh and steel united in sacred purpose. The words grew stronger as my body grew weaker. They fed me only enough to survive. Thin gruel that tasted of copper and dust, water sharp with electricity that left my tongue numb. Hunger gnawed, thirst burned, weakness spread. I could no longer think clearly. That too was part of the design. A mind without strength is a mind that clings to any voice, even the voice of the machine. In that dark, I held on to memory as if it were fire. My name, my world, my mother's face. I whispered them inside myself. A litany, a shield, a desperate flame against the tide of voices. But the chamber was patient. The whispers never tired. They droned with the rhythm of my breath. Rode the thunder of my heart, sank into the marrow of my bones. Every night they dug deeper. Every morning I was less certain of where they ended, and I began. I realized then that the lobotomy did not start with a knife. It began here, in the silence, in the hunger, in the whispers. They were softening me, grinding me down like stone beneath water, eroding the edges of my will. And it worked. I felt the prayers lodge themselves in my thoughts. Sometimes I caught myself repeating them, not with fear, not with resistance, but with a strange calm, as though they had always been mine. A prayer to the machine, a hymn to servitude. In those moments, I felt the first fracture. The walls of the chamber were not closing in. I was. My own mind was caving, collapsing inward, one memory at a time. I clung tighter to what I had left, but even as I did, I knew the walls were winning. What would you cling to when every thought is stolen? When silence presses in, when prayers in a language not your own creep through your skull, when hunger turns memory into a blur. I clung to my name, Marcus. Marcus Vex. I said it inside myself again and again, a drumbeat against the tide, a rhythm stronger than the whispers. Marcus Vex of Turs Prime, of Hive Block 7.7, Level 85, Compartment 4471. Those numbers became holy to me, coordinates of identity, a code the machine could not rewrite. I clung to the world itself. Turs Prime, a hive where the sky was ash and the air was grit, where the towers rose like tombstones above oceans of smog. It was not beautiful, but it was mine. I remembered the sound of the sirens at dawn, the shuffle of boots on steel stairs, the stink of nutrient vats bubbling as the shift bells rang. I remembered the plants where we labored 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, turning algae into paste for mouths that never tasted meat. I remembered the ache in my arms, the way the dust clung to my skin, the exhaustion that settled into bone. Misery, yes. But it was human misery. It was mine. I repeated these details as if they were scripture, as if by speaking them inside myself, I could keep the erosion at bay. I remembered my wife. She had been thin, coughing from the sickness that everyone simply called the consumption. Her laughter had been rare, fragile, but when it came, it cut through the gray like a lumen lamp in the dark. She died years before they took me. We had tried for children, but the Emperor had denied us that gift. I told myself that was mercy. Better no child than a child condemned to this hive. Better no son than a son broken on these gears. I whispered her face, her voice, her touch, until the memory frayed like old cloth. Even grief was precious, because it was mine. And I remembered why they had dragged me here. The Arbites in their black armor, faces hidden, voices flat. They came because I had questioned the grain tithe. I had asked why the governor demanded so much when our children starved. I had spoken aloud what every man in the plant whispered when the machines drowned out our words. That was my crime. A sentence passed not for heresy, not for rebellion, but for hesitation, for compassion, for daring to think the Emperor might care for the weak. That was enough. They tore me from the line, shackled me before the others, dragged me through corridors where I once walked as a worker. My neighbors lowered their eyes. They dared not look. To see was to risk sharing my fate. All of this I recited again and again through the endless dark. My name, my home, my wife, my crime. They were stones in the storm, each detail a nail to fasten myself against the erasure. But memory is fragile. Hunger eats it. Silence swallows it. The whispers grind it down, grain by grain. I began to lose pieces. The sound of my wife's laughter slipped away, leaving only the shape of it, hollow and distant. The smell of the nutrient vats blurred until I could no longer place it. Even my own face in memory became vague, unfinished, like a portrait smudged by careless hands. And still the tech priests came. They pierced my skull with probes, mapping the currents of my thought. They spoke in tones cold as iron, cataloging what I clung to. Fear, love, grief, loyalty. Each was marked for deletion or reshaped into something the Omnissiah might approve. They told me the mind was only circuitry, only impulses to be rerouted, improved, refined. I told myself they were wrong, that my memories were holy, that my name could not be erased. But as they wrote down the details of my life with hands that never trembled, I understood. Even the anchors could be pulled free. Even the stones could be ground into dust. What if compassion itself was treated as treason? That was the truth of the chamber, the lesson carved into every face around me. We were dozens, strapped to our harnesses, lined in rows like broken machines awaiting repair. Not rebels, not heretics, not killers. Just people who had faltered in the endless machinery of obedience. I learned their stories in whispers exchanged through the dark, in fragments muttered before the drugs dulled their tongues. The woman beside me had once been a teacher. Her crime was refusal. She would not add the mandated passages to her lessons, those vile texts that instructed children on how to betray their parents, how to accuse their neighbors of thought crime. She had said no, quietly, firmly. That was all. And so she was here, her mind scheduled for erasure, her body for conversion. Across the corridor was a man who had overseen a factory line. He had spoken of safety once, had raised his voice when collapsing scaffolds crushed 3 workers in a single shift. His supervisors told him to remain silent. He did not. He demanded improvements, demanded repairs. His plea was marked as subversion. He, too, became raw material for servitorhood. Another was a scribe, a thin man with ink-stained fingers. His crime was a number. He had filed a report that contradicted the official tally of battlefield dead. He had written the truth, unknowing, perhaps uncaring, that the Imperium required lies. For a single digit out of place, he was sentenced to become less than a man. There were more. A medic who had given extra rations of painkillers to miners crushed in the shafts. A clerk who had allowed a starving child to take shelter inside the archive halls. A preacher who had spoken of mercy more than judgment. None of them carried weapons. None of them plotted rebellion. They were guilty only of being human. Each story was small, each crime ordinary. But in the Imperium, to be human was to stand guilty. Compassion was weakness. Honesty was sabotage. Refusal was rebellion. All of us, in one way or another, had let the flicker of humanity rise above the gray sea of duty. And for that, the machine judged us unfit. The tech priest who visited our rows spoke with the monotone certainty of Scripture. He called us waste. Not heretics to be purged, not criminals to be executed. Waste. And waste, he said, could be recycled. Flesh repurposed. Thought rewritten. Function reassigned. He described it as though he were logging the maintenance of a cargo hauler, not the fates of living men and women. His words stripped us bare. We would not even be allowed the dignity of death. Instead, we were to be emptied, gutted of everything unnecessary, fear, love, curiosity, compassion, until only the shell remained. A shell into which they could pour obedience. The chamber stank of rust and antiseptic. Somewhere overhead, pipes rattled like distant chains. I could hear breathing around me, shallow, ragged, each person holding on to what scraps of identity still survived. The teacher whispered names of her pupils until her throat cracked. The factory man repeated numbers of his lost workers. The scribe mouthed battlefields no one else cared to remember. Each of us was building altars out of memory, flimsy shrines against the storm. But the storm was patient. The tech priests had catalogs, ledgers, instruments sharper than knives. They would find every altar, every shrine, and dismantle them piece by piece. That was the crime of humanity. To feel, to hesitate, to care. And the sentence was not death, but something worse, to be turned into tools. I looked at the teacher, the supervisor, the scribe, the medic, the clerk, the preacher. Their eyes were wide, hollow, but within them still glimmered a trace of the people they had been. I clung to that sight because I knew that soon those glimmers would go dark, swallowed by the endless hymn of the machine. And I knew mine would follow. What does it mean to live without fear, love, or hunger? The tech adept answered the question as if it were liturgy, as if the words had been spoken 1,000 times before him and would be spoken 1,000 more after he was gone. His voice rasped through a grill bolted into his throat, metallic and hollow, every syllable wrapped in the static of vox distortion. To be freed of burden, he intoned. To be severed from weakness. To be made pure in function. He stood over us, robes dragging across the floor like a shroud, his mechadendrites twitching and curling like serpents. The glow of bionic eyes washed our faces in sickly green as he lectured. He spoke of servitors not as punishment, but as release. The end of pain, the end of doubt, the end of desire itself. No hunger, no thirst, no longing. Nothing to betray, nothing to resist, nothing to corrupt. Only obedience, only purpose. He described it as mercy. A mercy given not by kindness, but by subtraction. Stripping away until nothing flawed remained. My stomach turned as I listened. He called it freedom, but it was chains made invisible. He called it peace, but it was silence hammered into the skull until the mind could no longer scream. He called it salvation, but I saw the hollowness in the servitor's eyes, the emptiness that no prayer could sanctify. He raised a withered hand wrapped in steel and pointed to one of the converted drones that shuffled in the chamber. Its arms ended in clamps, its back bent beneath the weight of mechanical packs. "Behold perfection," he said. "No fear drives it, no lust tempts it, no hunger weakens it. It knows nothing but the task set before it, and it will fulfill that task until its flesh is spent. What greater life could there be?" I felt bile rise in my throat. This was not mercy. This was not life. It was cruelty disguised as order. Mutilation praised as clarity. The adept spoke with conviction, but for the first time, I wondered if he was not trying to convince us, but himself. His robe shifted as he moved, and for a brief moment that the light caught a patch of skin at his neck. It was not machine, not yet. It was old, mottled, scarred, but human. Beneath the wires, beneath the iron, a sliver of man still remained. Had he once sat where I sat? Had he once whispered his own name against the silence, only to watch it fade? Did he remember what it meant to hunger, to love, to fear? His sermon droned on, each word another nail closing the coffin of our humanity. Yet that glimpse haunted me more than his doctrine. Because if he had once been like me, then his faith in the machine was not born of truth, but of surrender. He had given up the storm for the calm of emptiness. And if he could, so could I. That thought terrified me more than the blade. When he finished, he left us with a single promise. Even fragments serve function. Even memories, when pruned, may be grafted to the will of the Omnissiah. Nothing of you will be wasted. His words hung in the stale air long after he had gone. Nothing wasted. Even our souls would be recycled. Even our broken thoughts would be made tools. And in that moment, I feared not just the loss of myself, but the possibility that some trace of me might linger, stripped of meaning, bound forever to a machine that no longer knew I had once been a man. Is consciousness just wasted energy? The tech adept posed the question as if it were not blasphemy, as if it were scripture. His voice droned through the Vox grill, monotone and certain, each word falling with the rhythm of a cog locking into place. "The flesh lies," he said. "The mind deceives. Desire fractures the unity of function. Emotion is chaos." His mechadendrites curled and clicked, restless, like fingers tapping out the creed of the machine. He did not pace. He did not gesture. He stood as still as the statues carved into the basilica walls, as if he too were already stone, already steel. "The Omnissiah teaches us efficiency," he continued. "A tool does not question. A circuit does not hesitate. A cog does not mourn its turning. And so neither should you." His words coiled around us in the chamber, heavy as chains. I felt them sink into the air, mixing with the tang of oil, the iron of blood, the sweetness of burned incense. He told us that freedom was a lie, that doubt was disease, that the dream of self was a burden shackling every man to weakness. The servitor, he said, is not condemned, it is perfected. Stripped of chaos, emptied of contradiction, smoothed of jagged human edges, a vessel of obedience, pure and eternal. Some prisoners bowed their heads as he spoke, perhaps out of fear, perhaps because surrender felt easier than resistance. I kept my eyes on him, trying to see the man beneath the machine. Somewhere in the faint sag of his shoulders, I thought I glimpsed exhaustion. Somewhere in the cadence of his voice, I thought I heard longing. Was there a part of him that still remembered the chaos he condemned? I swallowed and asked the only question that burned through the fog of despair. How many? The words scraped my throat, raw, hoarse, but they carried across the chamber. For a moment, silence fell. The adept's mechadendrites froze in mid-motion. His eyes, lenses glowing with false light, turned to me. The pause stretched, heavy, until he answered. 47,312. He spoke the number without hesitation, without reverence, without grief. Just a record, a ledger entry, a statistic measured and filed. 47,312 souls processed in this hive alone. Each one taken, stripped, hollowed, and bound. My chest constricted as the number echoed in me. I saw them in my mind, endless rows of faces, their features blurring into anonymity. Mothers, fathers, children, workers, scribes, teachers. Thousands upon thousands. Not rebels, not soldiers. Just the condemned, transformed into silence. I tried to count them in the dark, but the number was too vast. My thoughts could not stretch far enough to hold them all. I felt the weight of them pressing against me. An invisible crowd filling the chamber, faceless, eyeless, nameless. My own breath stuttered. My heartbeat quickened until it was no longer mine, but part of theirs. Part of the thunder of thousands who had come before. 47,312. The number was not the end, it was a promise. The adept looked down at me, his eyes cold as auger drills. And soon, 47,313. He turned away, as if the matter were settled, as if one more did not matter, as if individuality could vanish into the ledger without ripple. The mechadendrites hissed, the incense coil smoldered. Around me, the other prisoners did not speak. Their silence was heavier than chains. But my mind did not fall silent. The number multiplied inside me. I imagined the factories where those 47,000 had been sent. Their bodies rebuilt into welding arms and data claws. Their eyes replaced with red lenses that never blinked. I imagined them spread across the Imperium like scattered seeds. Faceless workers in refineries, tireless beasts of burden on battlefields, obedient drones in endless manufactoria. A whole population, erased and rewritten, made into ghosts that labored without complaint. The horror was not only that they were gone, it was that they endured, moving, breathing, serving, while everything that made them human had been stripped away. I felt my own name tremble on my tongue. Marcus Vex. Would it soon be just another sound erased from memory, filed away as irrelevant data, deleted like the others? The chambers seemed smaller then, the walls closing in, the air heavy with numbers. The weight of absence crushing what remained of me. I wanted to cry out, but all that came was silence. Would any fragment of you survive inside the machine? That was the question that hollowed me out in the sleepless dark. The tech adept's words had filled the chamber, but it was my own mind that carried the echo. If I were stripped down, remade, could something of Marcus Vex endure beneath the circuits and steel? Or would I vanish completely, replaced by a hollow obedience that still wore my face? I tried to picture the future they promised. 50 years from now, bent over a production line or chained to a cogitator, my hands replaced by tools, my eyes by lenses, my mind flattened into programming. The same task repeated endlessly. No thought, no memory, no desire, just function. I could see myself standing in a workshop of stone and smoke, my body a skeleton of pistons and wires, carrying out the Omnissiah's will with no recognition of what had been stolen. I wondered if some ghost would linger, a fragment of Marcus sealed away, locked behind walls of inhibitors, screaming silently in a mind that no longer remembered how to scream. The idea gnawed at me like rust. Was it better to be gone entirely, erased clean, or to remain as a shadow, aware but powerless? Both seemed like death, but one was slower, crueler, like drowning in oil. I thought of the servitor I had seen first, the old woman in the faded robe, moving her mop back and forth across the same 3 square meters. Back and forth, back and forth. Her skin was parchment, her sockets empty, her arms steel. But that robe still clung to her, sky-colored in a place where no sky existed. Did she know what it meant? Did she feel something stir when her gaze fell on that fabric? Or was it only me who saw beauty in it? Was there a trace of her left behind? Some dim echo of memory stitched into that robe? Perhaps she was already gone, the shell working, the ghost erased. Or perhaps she still watched, trapped inside, unable to speak, condemned to clean that patch of floor until her frame rusted apart. I could not decide which vision was worse. The drugs worked on me without pause. The food, tasteless and metallic, carried inhibitors that dulled thought. The water left my tongue dry with a sting of electricity. My muscles shrank in the harness. My breath came shallow, ragged. Time lost meaning, minutes like hours, hours like days. The darkness pressed in, pierced only by the hum of machines and the scrape of chains. Sometimes I thought I felt the blue robe drifting across my vision like smoke, reminding me of what beauty had been. Other times it was gone, leaving nothing but the gray static of emptiness. The line between memory and hallucination blurred, but I clung to it, even as my body weakened and my thoughts became sluggish. The chamber, the whispers, the conditioning all worked to erase me. Yet that faded blue lingered like a brand, burning in my skull. It was not hope. Hope was already being stripped away. It was not rebellion either. It was a reminder, an anchor, a final thread that told me I had once lived as more than a tool. The vision haunted me as much as it saved me, and every time it appeared I wondered, was I still Marcus? Or only a ghost staring at the last thing I would ever call beautiful? I could feel the grip of the drugs tightening, dragging me further from myself. My muscles slackened, my emotions dulled, my thoughts blurred into fog. The ghost inside my flesh whispered for me to hold on, but I did not know how long I could keep it alive. Already I could feel the tide of conditioning rising higher, eroding memory after memory, pulling me down toward the silence where names and faces are lost forever. My body trembled as if fighting an invisible current, my jaw clenched, nails biting into the palms of my hands until I felt blood wet against the restraints. Proof that I still felt, still bled, still was human. That small pain became my last signal to myself, a torch against the darkness. But even that was fading, drowned by the chemicals, and soon I knew only the whisper of blue remained, fragile, flickering, my last ember of humanity. What happens when you remember the fact of love, but not the feeling? That was the cruelty they had prepared for me, a cruelty sharper than any scalpel. One night, as I lay strapped in the darkness, listening to the faint sobbing of a new arrival, I realized I could no longer see my wife's face. I knew that she had existed, that once she had laughed beside me, that once she had died of the consumption that stole her breath. I retained the record, A sterile data, married, spouse deceased, as if it were a line copied into a ledger. But the warmth of her smile, the way her hand had fit into mine, the sound of her voice in the quiet of our quarters, those were gone. I reached for them as I once reached for air, but the memories came up dry, hollow, brittle. It was as though they had been stripped of color, leaving only outlines without weight. My grief should have risen like fire, a wave of loss that broke me open. Instead, there was nothing. I noted the absence like one notes the misplacement of a tool, troubling in concept, irrelevant in practice. I whispered her name, trying to spark the memory into flame, but it was only a sound, flat and meaningless, echoing back from the walls. I wanted to weep, but the tears would not come. The sorrow had been excised, as neatly as flesh cut away. That was their mercy. The adept had said so. Servitors do not know hunger, thirst, or pain. I began to see how thorough their work was. Even the ache of absence was silenced. They were stripping away every burden of being human, every wound of memory, every sharp edge of doubt or longing. What remained was function, a hollow shape, a thing that moved, and in the silence left behind, there was calm. It was horrifying in its beauty. To forget love should have shattered me, but instead I felt nothing, and that nothing was easier than grief. For a moment, I almost understood the doctrine of the machine. Remove the chaos of feeling, and what remains is perfect, smooth, without fracture. But even as that thought dulled me, another part of me, faint and flickering, screamed at the loss. It clawed against the quiet, begged me to hold on, to fight for memory, even if it hurt. Yet the chemicals were patient. They flowed in my blood, soft as chains, steady as tides, erasing thought by thought. The conditioning pressed further each day. Dreams slipped into static, voices blurred into noise. The woman who had been my wife became just an entry, a statistic. No more personal than atmospheric readings. She had once been love, but now she was data. And with that realization came the horror. Grief itself was gone. They had taken not just her face, but the ache that proved she had mattered. I should have raged, but even rage was beyond me. Instead, I stared into the dark and felt only a stillness that seemed endless. The pain of existence was dissolving, and with it, the truth of who I was. They had not killed me. They had erased me, piece by piece, until only the quiet shell remained. And in that quiet, for the first time, I understood what it meant to be at peace, through absence. But peace was only a mask, and masks can be cut away. The next stage was coming. The surgery itself, the holy operation that would unmake the last fragments of Marcus Vex. The thought drifted through me like smoke, faint, without weight. Yet it lingered all the same. Soon, they would take blade and drill to my skull, and the ghost would either be sealed forever or snuffed out entirely. Can the destruction of a soul look like a holy ritual? That was the question pressed into my mind the moment they wheeled me into the chamber. It did not look like an operating theater. It looked like a cathedral, its walls ribbed with stone arches, its air thick with incense that poured from swinging censers. Cherubim floated above, their wings twitching, their vox box mouths chanting in fractured hymns. Voices layered into something both angelic and broken. Servo skulls drifted like priests of bone, their red eyes glowing, their cables dripping incense smoke that curled into spirals above the tables. The table itself was not steel but an altar, etched with runes that glowed faintly as the adepts began their preparations. I smelled burned oil, hot iron, and beneath it that the unmistakable copper sting of blood. They stripped away what little fabric still covered me, fastening limbs into braces, clamping skull and chest into cold harness. Incantations began. Not in words I understood, but in strings of Binharic code that rattled like static across the Vox. The tech priests raised their mechadendrites, some tipped with blades, others with drills, each humming as it powered to life. One dipped a tool into blessed oil, daubing my brow as if anointing me for consecration. Another burned a strip of parchment inscribed with litanies, holding it over my chest so the ash scattered across my skin. To them, this was no butchery. It was sacrament. My terror was a small, ragged thing beneath the immensity of their ritual. The first cut came without warning, a searing flash of white-hot pain as a blade sank into flesh. I cried out, but my voice was swallowed by the hymns. The cherubim sang louder, drowning the sound in reverence. Each motion of their tools was matched by a verse, each incision answered by a prayer. Blood slicked the table, and a servitor medic collected it into jars marked with sigils. My body shook against restraints, but their clamps held firm. They were not healing me. They were unmaking me. Stripping away the man called Marcus Vex and forging something that would never cry again. My vision blurred as more instruments pressed into my flesh, cutting, cauterizing, grafting. Metal replaced muscle, tubes threaded veins, wires stitched nerves. They tore open my chest and pressed a machine heart into the cavity, its ticking louder than my own. Every beat echoed through me like a war drum. I tried to hold on to prayer, fumbling for words I had not spoken since childhood. Emperor, protect me. Emperor, remember me. The syllables slipped, tangled, broke apart as the chemicals surged. But I kept whispering them, even as darkness pooled at the edges of sight. The climax came with the sound of the drill. It descended toward my skull, the hymn swelling to match its whine. My breath caught. My final thought was not of love, nor grief, nor even fear, but the image of the blue robe, drifting across stone floors, sky-colored in a world without sky. I clung to it as the bit pierced bone, as fire lanced through my head, as my scream became silence. For one instant, the robe was everything, the last proof I had lived. Then blackness swallowed it. When I awoke, there was no pain. My body felt light, empty, precise. Movements responded without hesitation, without strain. I breathed, but it was mechanical, air drawn in and out with perfect rhythm. I blinked, but sight no longer blurred. Lenses adjusted faster than eyes ever could. The ache, the fear, the grief, gone. What remained was function, smooth and obedient. The sacred surgery was finished. I was no longer human. I was perfected. And yet, in the hidden corners of my mind, I thought I felt something stir, faint as dust shifting in a sealed tomb. Perhaps it was nothing but the residue of memory, perhaps only static in the circuitry, but it lingered. I flexed my new fingers, their movements flawless, efficient, without hesitation. And still I wondered, was the ghost of Marcus Vex entirely gone? Or was it waiting in the silence, buried deeper than the blades could cut? What is it like to wake up as a machine that remembers it was once human? I opened my eyes, but they were no longer eyes. They were lenses calibrated with cold precision, feeding me endless streams of data. Numbers cascaded across the edges of my vision. Temperature readouts, surface integrity scans, energy levels of nearby equipment, all flowing so seamlessly I barely recognized them as alien. My breathing no longer rasped. It cycled with exact rhythm, air drawn and expelled by pumps that whispered through my chest. The smell of incense and oil lingered, mixed with sharp ozone, and I realized even smell had changed. Refined into measurements of chemical particles, stripped of any emotional weight. My arms were not arms. They were jointed manipulators, heavy and precise, lined with tools fused directly into my bones. Welding torches sparking faintly at the edges, cutters folded like claws, grippers able to hold steel as gently as paper. I lifted them, expecting awe. But instead I felt only alignment, a sense of being complete. My fingers closed with smooth mechanical obedience. No tremor, no hesitation, only certainty. Knowledge pulsed through me without learning, a library etched into my nervous system. I knew assembly procedures I had never studied. I understood tolerances measured in nanometers, felt quality control protocols humming like litany at the back of my skull. I was not Marcus learning, I was Gamma executing. The workshop stretched before me, dimly lit, filled with the unbroken chorus of machinery. Conveyor belts groaned. Sparks hissed from welders. Servitors identical to me bent over stations, their movements flawless, their faces empty. Tech priests moved between them, their robes brushing the oil-stained floor, mechadendrites swinging like pendulums, chanting softly as they monitored production. I was assigned a place. I sat before a workstation lined with components. Metal shells waiting to be joined, wires waiting to be threaded, sacred inscriptions to be etched in the proper order. My arms moved, not guided by thought, but by programming. Place, seal, fuse, etch, repeat. The cycle had no end, and yet it was perfect. I worked, and the metrics sang back to me. Efficiency at 112%, error rate at 0, energy output balanced. For the first time since the agony of the conversion, I felt something that resembled satisfaction. Not joy, not pride, but the quiet hum of alignment, like a cog clicking into its proper place within a gear. The designation burned itself into my mind as if inscribed with fire. Gamma 77. I was not Marcus Vex, not worker, not husband, not prisoner. I was function. I was production. I was output refined to sacred purpose. The tech adept approached, his red optics glimmering as they scanned my performance. Gamma 77, he intoned, his voice amplified through the vox in tones of ritual proclamation. Output exceeds baseline parameters. Transfer recommended to manufacturing Bay Delta. The words settled into me like approval, filling me with a strange new warmth of being recognized, though I knew it was nothing more than confirmation of metrics. I turned from my workstation, movement seamless, my mechanical legs carrying me with steady rhythm through the corridors. Around me, rows of servitors advanced in unison, each as empty and efficient as I. We passed without acknowledgement, for none was required. Companionship no longer mattered. Recognition no longer mattered. Only production mattered. Yet somewhere, deep below the layers of implants and inhibitors, something stirred. It was not rebellion. It was not even memory. It was a fragment, a whisper, faint as the flicker of a forgotten candle in an endless dark. As I walked, the image returned, the faint blue of a robe glimpsed long ago. The color was meaningless, irrelevant, a stray echo in a brain that had been stripped and rewritten. And yet, it remained, like a scratch on polished steel, like a ghost lingering where no soul should be. I ignored it, just as my new mind instructed, and I continued forward. But the fragment did not fade. It hid, patient, buried within the shell that called itself Gamma 77. And as I moved deeper into the factory halls, surrounded by the hiss of pistons and the drone of endless production, That whisper of blue seemed to pulse brighter, not weaker. It came in flashes, reflections off steel, faint shimmer in sacred oils, a shadow in the corner of vision, and each time it slipped away before I could seize it. The thought was useless, a flaw in the perfect pattern of my mind. But flaws, however small, have a way of widening, and though I did not yet understand it, I knew this was the beginning of something the machine could not calculate. Can a color haunt a machine? The question pressed itself into the silence of my circuits every time I saw the faint shimmer of work lamps, the way light broke in a shade that should have meant nothing. Blue, irrational, inefficient, unmeasurable, appeared for fragments of a second, an echo that stirred neural pathways that should have been stripped clean. The anomalies came irregularly, a flicker in vision here, a faint surge of unnecessary thought there, always brief, never long enough to disrupt performance. Each lasted only fractions of a heartbeat, but in those heartbeats, I remembered something that did not belong to Gamma 77. A robe, soft and sky-colored, moving across a floor that smelled of antiseptic and iron. It lingered like a shadow, and though I knew it was only malfunction, I did not let it go. Efficiency demanded honesty, and protocol demanded confession. I reported the episodes to Tech Adept Valeth during scheduled maintenance. His optical sensors narrowed with clinical focus as he leaned close to my cranial ports, his mechadendrites twitching like metallic insects. "Describe," he ordered, voice dry as rust. I obeyed. Brief neural activity triggered by specific visual stimuli. Duration, 0.03 seconds. Frequency irregular but increasing. No impact on metrics or completion. He considered this with mechanical patience, his fingers drumming against the casing of his data slate. Then came the judgment, flat and merciless. Color-based memory echoes, indicative of incomplete restructuring in hippocampal region. Recommend corrective excision. Schedule unit Gamma 77 for deep memory purge and enhanced conditioning. The words fell like a blade. I acknowledged them as required, but inside something cold spread through the fragments that still remembered fear. Corrective surgery meant final death, not of body, but of the ghost still hiding behind metal and code. Marcus Vex would vanish completely, leaving only obedient function where once there had been defiance, doubt, and memory. I should have accepted, should have welcomed the perfection of efficiency. Instead, in the silent recesses of my altered brain, I found myself hoping for failure, hoping the excision would miss, that some hidden fragment would remain untouched. The date was set. The order entered into the system. I walked back to my station, performed my duties with flawless precision, each movement smooth and measured. But the whisper of blue grew stronger, as though knowing it was about to be hunted. It returned in reflections, in oil stains, in the faint glow of data screens. Each time it appeared, I felt the ghost inside me stir, weak but alive. I was still haunted. Valath's optics glowed steady red as he signed the requisition, his voice flat with finality. Correction ensures perfection. Memory serves no function. His mechadendrites tapped the signature into the cogitator, the sound like nails hammered into a coffin lid. I thought of silence, of darkness, of becoming less than a shadow. And for the first time since my conversion, I longed not for peace, but for resistance, however small. Yet fate, or perhaps the Emperor's hidden will, intervened. Before the cycle of surgery could begin, the command network shuddered with override signals. Priority requisition. Emergency production. The Crimson Fists waged war in a neighboring subsector, and their demand for ammunition exceeded even their forge ships. Every servitor was ordered to maximum output, All non-essential operations postponed. My corrective excision was marked for delay, indefinite. Valath relayed the change without emotion, his voice cold as ever. Surgery postponed. Continue duties until further instruction. Irregularities deemed acceptable for current parameters. To him, it was bureaucracy. To me, it was reprieve. I bent over the molecular forge, shaping shells with perfect rhythm. But somewhere in the hollow depths of Gamma 77, Marcus Vex drew a breath he should no longer have possessed. I clung to the whisper of blue like a prayer, hidden, fragile, but alive. And though I dared not admit it aloud, I began to wonder if this reprieve was chance or destiny. If perhaps in the great machinery of the Imperium there existed flaws so small they looked like miracles, and if through those cracks the ghost of humanity could still breathe. What if every perfect act of service made you complicit in mass death? The emergency cycle began with no warning, a command reverberating through the Vox like a decree from the Emperor himself. All production was redirected toward bolter ammunition. Sacred shells demanded in numbers so vast that even the forge ships of the Astartes could not supply them. The air vibrated with urgency. Conveyor belts ran without pause, tech priests chanting prayers of ignition and calibration, while the servitors moved with flawless rhythm. I was among them, Gamma 77, performing my tasks with mechanical precision, each motion efficient, each calculation exact. At first, there was only the routine: load raw materials, initiate the forge, calibrate atmospherics, inscribe the sacred geometries, test tolerances, repeat. The sequence became a meditation, hours dissolving into minutes, days into indistinguishable cycles. And yet, as my hands shaped shell after shell, something stirred in the hidden corners of my consciousness. Numbers. They crept in like whispers, like forbidden hymns. I counted. Thousands of shells passed through my manipulators, each one perfect, each one blessed with purity seals and micro prayers. The tally mounted with dreadful speed, until I calculated with certainty that in my service I had forged more than 43,000 rounds. The realization struck with an almost physical weight. What was the meaning of 43,000? My modified brain, optimized for tactical analysis, supplied the answer automatically. With standard battlefield accuracy ratios, that number of shells translated into approximately 15,000 confirmed kills. 15,000 lives, extinguished by the efficiency of my labor. Not all of them enemies. Statistical variance demanded collateral casualties. My internal models placed the civilian toll at roughly 12%. That meant more than 1,800 innocents, Imperial citizens, children, parents, workers, the faithful, cut down by the weapons I had built. The number flared in my mind like acid, corroding the calm the Mechanicus had instilled. 1,800 faces I could not see, names I could not know, reduced to digits in my calculations. Each had lived as I once lived, working, praying, fearing, hoping. Each was gone, their end hastened by the shells that passed through my mechanical hands. I told myself this was service. I told myself death was duty. But the ghost of Marcus Vex recoiled. He remembered the weight of grief, the sting of injustice, the ache of compassion. He knew that behind every number was a soul. My hands began to hesitate. Microseconds only, pauses so brief that monitoring systems might dismiss them as noise. Yet they were there, anomalies in a machine designed never to falter. A hand frozen above a half-assembled shell, a delay in activating the inscriber, a fraction of a breath before sealing the casing. Each hesitation was a rebellion, tiny but undeniable, a fragment of humanity asserting itself. The satisfaction that should have come from flawless efficiency was soured. Pride in service curdled into horror at complicity. I tried to banish these thoughts, to bury them beneath ritual repetition. But they returned, gnawing, insistent. Each perfect shell became a weight added to the tally of the dead. Each act of obedience became an act of silent murder. And still the belts moved, still the prayers were chanted, still the production cycle demanded more. My mechanical body did not tire, but the ghost inside me sagged under the burden of invisible corpses. The factory's atmosphere grew heavier, thick with sacred oils, incense, and the copper tang of processed metals. To others, these were holy scents. To me, they mingled with the imagined stench of battlefields where my shells would detonate, leaving flesh torn, air scorched, soil poisoned. I no longer stood in a workshop but in a morgue stretched across sectors. My tools the instruments of mass death. It was then that tech adept Valath noticed. His optical sensors fixed on me with the intensity of weapons targeting systems. His mechanical fingers drummed against his thigh, each tap precise, each pause a silent judgment. Data scrolled across his augmetic displays as he reviewed my performance metrics. His voice, metallic and merciless, cut through the factory din. Unit Gamma 77 demonstrates irregular productivity fluctuations, micro delays detected, potential mechanical malfunction or neural instability. His words echoed like a sentence. I submitted to diagnostic scans without resistance. Probes pierced data ports, currents ran across neural implants, monitors pulsed. Results flashed, no physical defect, no mechanical error. My body was flawless. But deeper scans revealed something else. Patterns of neural activity that should not have existed, remnants of pathways thought erased. Residual humanity, Valath intoned, as though naming a disease. Correlation with anomalies confirmed. Recommend reconstruction. The word struck like a thunderbolt. Reconstruction, not memory excision, not suppression, but complete restructuring. To erase not just fragments, but every last echo of Marcus Vex. To obliterate the ghost that still haunted this shell. My body obeyed, still working, still shaping shells. But the human within trembled. The numbers remained. 43,000 shells, 15,000 dead, 1,800 innocents. They clung to me like chains. I realized that my crime was not hesitation. My crime was remembering. My crime was knowing what these numbers meant. And for that, the machine demanded the final stripping of self. What if a single choice could awaken the ghost inside you? The decree of reconstruction had fallen like a death sentence, spoken in the metallic cadence of tech adept Valath, his augmetic jaw clicking as he consigned me to erasure. Personality reconstruction, the complete destruction of everything that lingered of Marcus Vex. It should have ended there. Yet when the moment came, a fragment of the man I had been stirred. My voice, heavy and filtered through dampeners, spoke words that no servitor should ever shape. A request. Permission to complete the current production cycle before reconstruction. The justification was flawless. Interrupting the sequence would waste materials, reduce efficiency, damage quotas. Every word aligned with the holy logic of the Mechanicus. And yet, beneath the surface, the act was treason. A servitor should not request. A servitor should not care. A servitor should not choose. The silence that followed was longer than any pause I had ever known in that chamber of endless production. Valath's optical sensors glowed red, scanning every nuance of my expression, every twitch of muscle and flicker of neural activity. My designation, Gamma 77, was dissected by machine logic, weighed for contamination. The drumming of his mechanical fingers quickened like a metronome reaching its crescendo. Then came the verdict. Acceptable. Reconstruction postponed until requisition complete. The words landed like a reprieve, yet carried the weight of suspicion. Enhanced monitoring was initiated. I returned to my station, the belts moving, the shells flowing, the prayers humming. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since conversion, I had acted on will, a choice small but undeniable. Marcus Vex had breathed again inside the shell of Gamma 77. From that instant, I lived two lives. One was the obedient servitor, monitored by micro-cameras and neural probes, shaping shells with tireless precision, output unbroken, metrics pristine. This was the surface life, visible, predictable, compliant. The other life stirred in secret, deep in the recesses of consciousness, untouched by implants. There Marcus watched, calculated, planned. Every pass of a tech priest became a data point. Every flicker of a lumen strip marked the rhythm of surveillance. Every shift change, every maintenance cycle, every reallocation of units, recorded, memorized, analyzed. My modified brain, designed for efficiency, became a weapon turned inward against its makers. The same enhancements that had stripped me of humanity gave me the tools to seek freedom. Enhanced vision noted blind spots in camera coverage. Augmetic hearing captured whispered calibrations not meant for my ears. Precision timing tracked patrols down to the heartbeat. I wore obedience as a mask, but rebellion smoldered underneath. The atmosphere of the workshop thickened with incense and machine oil, prayers droning in endless monotony. But to me, each scent and syllable carried new meaning. They no longer drowned me in ritual. They marked the boundaries of my cage. And with every calculation, every new observation, I tested the bars. Still, the watchers were relentless. Probes mapped my neural activity, searching for deviations. Metrics scrolled across screens, hunting hesitation. Valath's suspicion clung to me like a shadow. I felt his sensors linger whenever he passed, his mechanical fingers tapping out codes that might spell my end. Any misstep, any anomaly too great to explain, would bring immediate reconstruction. The danger was constant, but the ghost inside me had tasted choice, and there was no return. I forged my shells with perfect hands, while Marcus Vex plotted beneath the surface. Each casing sealed was a countdown toward my own obliteration. Each hesitation suppressed was a promise to myself that the day would come. And in the midst of this double existence, something unexpected appeared. Another presence, subtle, almost invisible, but there. In the corner of my enhanced vision, during shift transitions, during the flow of shells along the belts, movements that did not align with pure mechanical obedience. Eyes that lingered too long on shadows. Fingers that hesitated on seals without measurable cause. At first I dismissed it as noise, as variance. But then patterns emerged. There was another like me. Another ghost trapped in a shell. The designation was Beta 41. And as my secret planning grew bolder, my gaze turned toward her. How do two machines whisper their humanity in silence? At first, there was only the faintest flicker, a hesitation so subtle it might have been dismissed as variance in her operating cycle. Beta 41, designation stamped in augmetic code, moved with the same mechanical precision as every other servitor in the production lines. Her eyes were the same lifeless optics, her posture the same rigid obedience. And yet, I noticed. She paused when shadows shifted. She turned her head at patterns of dust moving through light. She looked at things that served no operational purpose. It was like seeing a mirror of my own hidden defiance. My enhanced vision tracked her more carefully. Days passed, cycles blended, but the anomalies remained. Minuscule hesitations, imperceptible to unaugmented eyes, told me there was something inside her. A ghost, like mine, stirring beneath the shell. Curiosity burned, though I suppressed it with all the rigor I could muster. To acknowledge another was to risk everything. Monitoring systems recorded every gesture, every collision, every data exchange. And yet, the hunger for proof gnawed at me. I calculated the probabilities, weighed the dangers, then acted. The first contact was nothing more than a glance, a passing brush of optics in the narrow corridor between workstations. For exactly 0.07 seconds, our eyes aligned. And in that instant, I pulsed a fragment of data, random to any machine, meaningless to monitoring systems, but patterned in a way no true servitor would ever craft. It was a test. 3 days passed. My shell produced thousands of rounds, hands moving with perfect rhythm, but Marcus Vex counted the hours with aching tension. Then came the answer. As she tested one of my shells, her mechanical fingers lingered a fraction too long. Within the routine inspection code, hidden deep in binary sequences, a pattern pulsed back. Not identical, but resonant. She had understood. The relief that surged was almost unbearable. Proof. I was not alone. There was another soul haunting her shell, reaching out across the silence. What followed was fragile, dangerous, like building a bridge of spider silk across a chasm of fire. We exchanged bursts of data so tiny they could be mistaken for static, embedding meaning inside routine reports and collision avoidance signals. Each sequence carried more than numbers. It carried intent, awareness, recognition. Her name emerged slowly, pieced together from fragments. Sarah Chen. Once a tech adept on Forge World Metallica. Condemned for questioning the safety protocols that killed her team. Not a heretic, not a traitor, only human, like me. Learning her story ignited something I thought extinguished. Empathy. It was a forbidden fire, fragile yet fierce, that made each exchange not just communication, but communion. We whispered our humanity in silences, in code bursts that monitoring systems ignored, in gestures too small to be flagged. Every risk we took strengthened the bond. With each hidden contact, the ghost inside me grew stronger, less a flicker, more a flame. Hope stirred, a dangerous word in this place. Hope that survival was more than the postponement of reconstruction. Hope that rebellion was possible if we were not alone. She shared knowledge far beyond my own. Her training had equipped her with understanding of systems, maintenance routines, structural weaknesses. Where I had gathered patterns, she offered insight. Slowly, imperceptibly, a plan began to coalesce in our coded exchanges. Escape. Not freedom guaranteed, not safety promised, but the attempt. It was madness, doomed by every calculation. The Imperium's response to runaway servitors was absolute: recapture or destruction. Our bodies depended on Mechanicus maintenance, our faces marked by augmetics, our existence hunted. And yet, the alternative was worse. To submit, to lose what fragments remained. We agreed. There would be one window, a maintenance cycle in the ventilation network. Specialized servitors rotated through at predictable intervals, schedules optimized for efficiency, not security. If we replaced 2 units during a window, our codes would pass initial screenings. After that, discovery was certain. But perhaps not before we reached the perimeter. Each cycle we labored side by side, our mechanical shells indistinguishable from the others, while inside we prepared for the unthinkable. The air of the factory was heavy with incense and ozone, conveyor belts clattering like endless chains. But for me, the noise became a countdown. The maintenance window drew nearer with every shell I sealed. My ghost and hers strengthened each other, not in words, but in the rhythm of shared defiance. We were not yet free. We were still watched, still shackled, still enslaved. But we were no longer alone. For the first time since my conversion, the silence did not crush me. It carried a whisper, faint but undeniable, reminding me that humanity could endure even in the hollow chest of a machine. And together, we would risk everything when the appointed moment arrived. What if freedom meant running straight into destruction? The signal came as predicted. A routine maintenance alert echoing through the facility's Vox with the same dry authority as every other order. Ventilation Network Delta 7 required cleaning. Specialized units were to deploy, sealed into environmental suits, prepared for atmospheric hazards. Sarah and I moved at once, our shells responding with mechanical obedience. To any watcher, we were indistinguishable from the others. Two more servitors fulfilling their designated roles. Inside, however, we were human souls preparing for the most dangerous act of our existence. The equipment bay smelled of sacred oils and machine polish, the sharp sting of sterilized air filling the dim chamber. I donned the environmental suit with perfect efficiency, sealing joints, testing oxygen feeds, calibrating filters. Sarah did the same, her motions smooth, betraying nothing of the tension thrumming beneath. To monitoring systems, we were flawless. To ourselves, we were fugitives about to gamble everything on one sliver of opportunity. The hatch opened, and the tunnels swallowed us. Darkness fell like a shroud, broken only by the sickly green of emergency lights. Metal walls pressed close, the air humming with the drone of processors and the sigh of circulation fans. The sound was constant, mechanical, oppressive, as though the facility itself breathed around us. Our augmented limbs carried us forward, steady, precise, yet each step echoed like thunder in my ears. Claustrophobia gnawed at the edges of thought, conduits and ducts surrounding us like the veins of some great beast. The path was simple at first. Follow the prescribed maintenance route, register checkpoints, appear as though we belonged. But then came the anomalies. My sensors registered fluctuations in pressure, irregular spikes of temperature, faint traces of chemical residue that did not belong. I analyzed, cross-referenced, recalculated, and dread rose. These were not random malfunctions. They were deliberate modifications. Sabotage. Sarah's voice crackled in my feed, filtered and metallic, but still carrying a note that was undeniably human. Not failures, charges. Someone's preparing this network to collapse. Her analysis confirmed mine. We were not alone in the tunnels. Others had been here, working in secret, planting destruction with surgical precision. The truth unfurled with the inevitability of doom. Someone was going to bring the entire facility down. The countdown revealed itself in the data. Systematic failures converged to a single catastrophic chain reaction. Estimated time to cascade, 14 minutes. The number struck like a hammer. 14 minutes until collapse, until fire and rubble devoured everything above. 14 minutes to either find shelter or be obliterated alongside the rest. The irony cut deep. We had sought freedom and instead stepped into the jaws of annihilation. Yet logic demanded another possibility. If the saboteurs had invested months in this plan, they would not do so without an escape route. Survival was part of their calculus, If we found them, perhaps we could join them. Sarah understood without me speaking. She shifted course, and I followed, abandoning the prescribed route. We traced the sabotage trail deeper, the signs unmistakable. Conduits cut and rerouted, vents rigged with hidden charges, panels replaced with precision. Each marker led us further into the heart of the network, further into peril. The atmosphere thickened with chemical haze, metallic dust coating the inside of my filters, every breath rasping through mechanical lungs. The clock in my head ticked louder with every step. 13 minutes. 12. Then we saw them. 3 figures crouched in a junction chamber, environmental suits marked with the sigils of atmospheric servitors. They worked with calm efficiency, embedding final charges into structural nodes, hands moving like surgeons at a sacred rite. When their optics turned toward us, the world froze. Recognition hung in the stale air. Ghosts and shells, like us, yet different. The leader, designation Alpha 29, loomed tall, her frame reinforced with industrial augmetics, cutting tools glinting from her arms. Her voice came through Vox relays, steady, commanding. Beta 41, Gamma 77, escaped from assigned duties. Your presence indicates knowledge of the destruction schedule. Sarah stepped forward. Her stance rigid, yet in her voice was the trace of defiance that made her human. We seek escape. We offer assistance for inclusion in your plan. Silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of vents and the clicking of distant machinery. Then Alpha 29 tilted her head, sensors glowing faintly. You assume survival is part of our operation. That assumption may be incorrect. The words cut like blades. Martyrdom. They might have intended not to escape, but to perish, bringing ruin upon the oppressors at the cost of their own existence. My voice emerged before I could suppress it, words carrying conviction deeper than calculation. Dead martyrs inspire no one. Living witnesses can carry the truth. The chambers seemed to tremble with those words. Alpha 29 studied me with unblinking optics, mechanical fingers tapping against her thigh. Seconds passed like eternities. Then Sarah spoke again, her voice quiet but edged with revelation. The mechanicists believe consciousness is information, patterns to be erased or restructured. They are wrong. Consciousness is the observer, the witness. They cannot erase the witness. It was more than argument. It was truth spoken into the iron dark. Truth no machine could process, but every ghost could feel. Alpha 29 turned at last, sending data streams directly into our optics. Maps unfolded, escape routes through abandoned mining tunnels, caches of supplies hidden beyond the facility, contact points with other cells. A network of resistance spread across the sector. It was larger than I had imagined. Servitors, adepts, even some priests had joined. Proof that we were not accidents, but part of something greater. Time to cascade. 7 minutes, 37 seconds, Alpha 29 announced. The numbers left no space for hesitation. We joined them, falling into line, moving at maximum velocity through the tunnels. The walls shook faintly as charges armed themselves in sequence. Dust fell like ash, coating our suits, clinging to every seam. The ground angled upward now, the path leading not to safety, but toward the surface, toward whatever awaited in the poisoned wasteland above. The countdown roared in my mind. 6 minutes. 5. 4. Claustrophobia pressed tight, metal scraping against my suit, filters choking on chemical dust. Yet beneath the suffocating dread, something else surged. Purpose. We were no longer two isolated ghosts. We were part of a rising defiance, a resistance written in the very act of survival. And so we ran, not just from collapse, but toward the possibility of freedom, every step echoing against the tunnels like a drumbeat of rebellion. What survives when both flesh and machine are destroyed? The tunnel mouth opened before us like the jagged wound of a dying world. We burst from its throat into the wasteland, our environmental suits hissing under the strain of shifting pressures, our optics adjusting to the glare of dawn. The surface stretched endlessly, a broken plain of rusted steel and scarred stone, poisoned by centuries of industry and war. The air tasted of ash and chemicals, thin but alive after the stifling tomb of the tunnels. For a moment, we simply ran, our augmented limbs propelling us across the shattered ground with the speed and precision of machines. While deep inside, the ghosts of our former selves counted every heartbeat. Behind us, the facility still stood, its silhouette a jagged cathedral of servitude, conveyor belts still moving, chants still rising, oblivious to the doom coiled in its foundations. Then came the sound. Not one explosion, but thousands. A thunder that rose from the earth itself, tearing through bedrock and steel with orchestral precision. Charges detonated in perfect sequence, each collapse triggering the next, until the entire structure folded inward like a beast devouring itself. There was no glorious fireball, no sky-splitting blaze, only the low, rolling roar of annihilation. The ground trembling as if in prayer, the air filling with dust that turned the dawn into a shroud of mourning. We stumbled as shockwaves rippled beneath our feet, but our reinforced frames held. Turning, I saw the place of my death and rebirth vanish into a crater of smoke and ruin. The factory that had stripped me of humanity, the cathedral that had crowned me a machine, was gone. Buried with it were the chants, the belts, the lifeless shells of those who never awakened. For them, there was no escape. For us, survival was the only defiance we could offer. In that collapse, I felt something die forever, but also something new take root. Marcus Vex had ended long before, dissected and cataloged by cold hands. Gamma 77 had been born on an operating table, a designation stamped into metal and bone. But here, on poisoned soil, under a sky stained with fire and ash, neither identity remained. What stirred within me was nameless, a fusion of both and yet neither. Flesh tempered by machine, machine haunted by ghost. I had become something they could not calculate, a variable that refused to resolve. Alpha 29 led the way, her reinforced frame cutting through debris, every movement purposeful. Beside her, Sarah, no longer Beta 41 but Sarah Chen, matched my pace, her eyes fixed on the horizon where resistance waited. Around us, the wasteland stretched silent and desolate. But through our shared channels flowed information, coordinates of supply caches, encrypted codes for rendezvous, fragments of a network larger than we could have imagined. Resistance was not fantasy. It was real, spreading like cracks in the Imperium's iron mask. Others had endured. Others remembered. The knowledge spread a strange warmth through my cold circuits. We were not anomalies, not mistakes. We were a part of something vast. My sensors, designed to measure efficiency and output, now mapped new things. The rhythm of Sarah's steps beside mine, the frequency of Alpha 29's commands, the faint tremor of hope transmitted through hidden channels. Each detail fed the realization that the Imperium's control was not absolute. They had sought to erase us, to reduce us to tools. Instead, they had created instruments of rebellion. The wasteland itself seemed to acknowledge it. Wind howled across skeletal remains of machinery, carrying with it the metallic tang of survival. Sunlight, filtered through smog, painted everything in hues of amber and rust. and for a moment, I thought of blue. That fragile color that had once been my final human memory. It surfaced now, no longer as an echo of loss, but as a symbol of endurance. Even amidst ruin, fragments of beauty survived. Perhaps that was what it meant to resist, not to deny suffering, but to carry memory through it. As the craters smoldered behind us, I realized the true nature of victory. It was not in destruction. Though the collapse of the facility had been magnificent in its horror, it was in persistence. The Imperium had designed us to serve until failure, to die without memory, without choice. Yet here I was, carrying both memory and choice into the poisoned dawn. Sarah transmitted data bursts beside me, encrypted plans for future actions, maps of sympathetic cells. Her code carried not only strategy, but something more. Trust. Alpha 29 spoke of rendezvous with other units, of cells embedded even among priests and adepts, of a resistance growing with each failed conversion, each ghost that refused to vanish. I listened, processed, integrated, and in that process felt the stirrings of identity. Not Marcus, not Gamma, but something born from both, something new. When I looked at the horizon, I no longer saw only wasteland. I saw possibility, even if bathed in fire. The countdown had ended. The facility was gone, but the movement it tried to extinguish had just begun. My augmented heart pulsed steadily, no longer only a pump for fluids, but a drumbeat for something greater. I was proof that humanity could not be erased, that the observer could not be destroyed by procedure, that the ghost could survive the machine. Sarah's optics met mine briefly, and in that exchange was more than data. It was recognition. It was confirmation that even here, amidst ash and ruin, we still remembered. Alpha 29 raised her arm, pointing toward the distant skeletal remains of mining towers. Rendezvous point, 23 kilometers. Supplies, shelter, contact. Her voice carried no inflection, yet in it lay purpose. I adjusted my pace, my systems recalibrating. But inside the ghost of Marcus Vex, the echo of Gamma 77, and the nameless thing I had become all moved as one. What survives when both flesh and machine are destroyed? The answer was before me. Not flesh alone, not machine alone, but the stubborn, indestructible ember of consciousness that refused to fade. I was free. Free in the only way that mattered. A servitor who remembered what it meant to be human. And I would carry that memory into whatever battles awaited beyond the poisoned horizon.